The distress beacon pierced through subspace like a scream in the darkness. Ambassador Krell of the Vaxian Confederacy stood before the Emergency Council chamber, his three eyes widening as the translated message scrolled across the holographic display. Around him, representatives from 17 different species shifted nervously in their seats, their various appendages twitching with anxiety. "The Drevnathi have breached the Outer Rim," Krell announced, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "4 colonies have already fallen. They're moving toward the core worlds." A collective murmur of fear rippled through the chamber. The Drevnathi were not negotiators. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They simply consumed everything in their path, stripping worlds of resources and leaving behind lifeless husks. Their fleet had appeared without warning 3 cycles ago, and nothing had slowed their advance. Counselor Thena, a crystalline being whose body refracted light in patterns that betrayed her emotional state, spoke up. "Our combined fleet couldn't stop them at Rigel Station. We lost 60% of our forces. What options remain?" The chamber fell silent. Every species present had contributed warships to the defense, and all had watched helplessly as the Drevnathi war machines tore through their formations like they were nothing more than obstacles to be swept aside. Krell's primary eye focused on an ancient data tablet resting on the podium before him. It was a relic, recovered from a derelict station at the edge of explored space decades ago. The text inscribed on its surface had been partially translated, revealing information about something called an emergency protocol and coordinates that led to a previously unknown region of space. "There may be one possibility," Krell said slowly. "The ancient protocol." Several counselors sat forward. Others displayed obvious skepticism through their species-specific body language. "That fairy tale?" Commander Zephix, a reptilian warrior from the Sauron Collective, hissed through his fangs. "The legends speak of a dormant civilization that would answer calls for aid, but no one has ever proven they exist. The coordinates on that tablet could lead anywhere." "Or nowhere," added another voice. Krell's manipulator appendages gripped the edges of the podium. "We've analyzed the tablet extensively. The technology embedded within it is far beyond our current capabilities. Whoever created it possessed knowledge we've yet to achieve. The protocol describes an automated distress system that, when activated, would reach across vast distances to summon aid." "Summon aid from whom?" Thena asked, her crystalline structure flickering with curiosity and doubt. "The text is damaged, but we've recovered fragments. References to Terrans or humans appear throughout, a species designation. Beyond that, we know little except that this protocol was designed as a last resort measure." Commander Zephix slammed a clawed hand against his console. "So we're discussing gambling our remaining resources on activating an ancient device that might call absolutely no one? Or worse, might summon something dangerous? What choice do we have?" Krell spread his appendages wide in a gesture of helplessness. "The Drevnathi will reach the core worlds within 40 planetary rotations. Our military forces are shattered. Evacuation would save some, but billions would die. If there's even a small chance this protocol could bring help, we must take it." The debate raged for hours. Some argued for immediate evacuation. Others suggested negotiation, though everyone knew the Drevnathi had never responded to communication attempts. A few advocated for a final desperate stand, knowing it would likely mean extinction for multiple species. Finally, as time continued its relentless march and the Drevnathi fleet drew ever closer, a vote was called. By a narrow margin, the Council agreed to attempt the ancient protocol. 3 days later, Krell stood aboard the research vessel Lightseeker, surrounded by the Confederacy's top scientists and linguists. They had traveled to the coordinates specified in the tablet, arriving in a completely empty region of space. No stars burned nearby, no planets orbited in the void, just darkness and the faint whisper of cosmic radiation. "Are we certain these coordinates are correct?" Dr. Mirren, a small mammalian researcher, asked nervously. Krell consulted his instruments. Verified multiple times. Whatever we're looking for should be here. The science team had spent weeks attempting to decipher the activation sequence. The tablet contained what appeared to be both technical schematics and ritual instructions, as if the creators wanted to ensure the protocol could be activated even by species that didn't fully understand the technology. "Beginning the sequence," announced the ship's technical officer. The Light Seeker's transmitters, specially modified based on the tablet's specifications, began broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't have been possible with Confederacy technology. The signal pulsed outward, carrying a carefully constructed message that combined mathematical constants, the Confederacy's location, and a desperate plea for assistance. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Krell felt his hopes sinking. Perhaps the skeptics had been right. Perhaps this was nothing more than an elaborate dead end. Then space itself seemed to ripple. The ship's sensors shrieked warnings as massive distortions appeared in the fabric of reality. Not one distortion, but dozens, then hundreds. The viewscreen struggled to process what it was seeing as portals tore open in the void, each one bleeding harsh blue-white light into the darkness. "By the ancient stars," whispered Dr. Mirren. Through the portals came ships, but these weren't like any vessels in the Confederacy database. They were angular and aggressive, built with clear military purpose. Some were small, perhaps corvette-sized by Confederacy standards. Others were massive, their hulls stretching for kilometers, bristling with what could only be weapons arrays. The sheer number was overwhelming. Krell's instruments counted 500 vessels, then 1,000, then 5,000. The fleet kept coming, portal after portal opening as if in response to a long-awaited summons. "We're being hailed," the communications officer announced, her voice shaking. "On screen," Krell commanded, straightening his posture despite his trembling appendages. The view screen shifted to show a human. Krell knew it was human because he'd studied the limited references in the tablet, but seeing one in reality was startling. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, face dominated by two forward-facing eyes that suggested a predatory evolutionary path. The being wore a dark uniform with insignia Krell didn't recognize. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation 5th Fleet," the human said, her voice carrying through the translation matrix with perfect clarity. "We received your distress call. What's your situation?" Krell's mind reeled. The protocol had worked. The dormant civilization wasn't dormant at all. They had answered, and they had answered with an armada. "I am Ambassador Krell of the Vaxian Confederacy. We face extinction from an invading force called the Drevnathi. They've destroyed our outer colonies and are advancing toward our core worlds. Our military forces have been decimated. We activated the ancient protocol as a last desperate measure. We had no idea if anyone would respond." Admiral Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or determination. "The ancient protocol," she said softly. "It's been a long time since that system was activated. How many days until the enemy reaches your core worlds?" 37, by our calculations." "Understood. We'll need tactical data on this enemy, deployment patterns, weapon capabilities, fleet composition, everything you have, and we'll need coordinates for the Confederacy's territory." Krell gestured to his crew, who immediately began transmitting the requested information. As the data flowed between the ships, more human vessels continued emerging from the portals. The fleet was now numbering well over 10,000 ships. "How many vessels do you have?" Krell couldn't help but ask. Admiral Chen glanced at something off-screen. "Currently arriving at this rally point? Approximately 15,000 ships from 5th Fleet, but we've put out a call. This is a protocol activation. Other fleets are being notified. Expect reinforcements within 12 hours. 15,000 ships. And this was just one fleet. Krell felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. "I must ask," Krell said carefully. "The ancient protocol suggests your species placed these beacons as... what? A defensive pact? An alliance agreement?" Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "It's complicated, Ambassador. Several thousand years ago, humanity explored beyond our borders and encountered younger species facing existential threats. We couldn't always intervene directly without violating their development, but we left the protocols as safety measures. If someone desperate enough to activate them, if the threat was great enough, we would come. Consider it our way of ensuring the galaxy remained diverse and alive." "You've done this before?" "Not in living memory," Chen admitted. "The protocols are ancient by our standards. Most humans thought they were myths. But the automated systems still functioned, and when your signal went out, every military installation in Terran space received it. You asked for help, Ambassador." Humanity answered. As they spoke, Krell watched the tactical display. The human fleet was organizing itself with practiced efficiency. Ships moved into formation with precision that spoke of extensive military training. Tanker vessels appeared, presumably carrying fuel or supplies. Larger ships that might be carriers or support vessels took positions at the fleet's center. "We've reviewed your tactical data," Admiral Chen continued. "The Drevnathi are formidable, but they're not invincible. We've fought similar threats before, wars that made the Extinction Wars look manageable." Krell wanted to ask what Extinction Wars meant, but decided that could wait. "What do you need from us?" he asked instead. "Stay out of our way," Chen said bluntly. "No offense intended, Ambassador, but if your combined fleet couldn't stop these Drevnathi, we don't want Confederacy ships mixing in with our formations. You'll get caught in crossfire or misidentified as hostiles. Provide us with updated intelligence, safe passage through your territory, and coordinates for civilian population centers we need to protect. We'll handle the fighting." It was almost insulting, but Krell understood the logic. The Confederacy had thrown their best forces at the Drevnathi and failed. These humans were offering to take on the entire burden of defense. "Understood, Admiral. We'll transmit all necessary data immediately." "Good. We're plotting jump coordinates now. Our fleet will arrive in your space within 6 hours. Recommend you alert your governments. The sight of 15,000 warships appearing might cause panic otherwise." Krell's appendages twitched in what his species considered dark humor. "I suspect, Admiral, that panic will give way to relief rather quickly." The transmission ended, and Krell slumped in his command chair. Around him, his crew sat in stunned silence. They had activated an ancient protocol hoping for anything, any small advantage. Instead, they had summoned a fleet that dwarfed the entire military might of the Confederacy. "Sir," the sensor officer spoke up, "more portals are opening. Another fleet is arriving." On the view screen, fresh distortions in space heralded the arrival of additional human vessels. These ships bore different markings, suggesting another fleet group. Behind them came more and more. "How many fleets do they have?" Dr. Mirren whispered. Krell had no answer. Humanity had hidden themselves away, leaving behind only ancient protocols and myth. But they clearly hadn't been idle. They had built something vast, something powerful, something that treated the deployment of 15,000 warships as merely the first response. As the Lightseeker prepared to return to Confederacy space ahead of the human Armada, Krell found himself pondering a disturbing question. If humanity had this much military power, what had they been preparing to fight? What threats existed in their region of space that required fleets numbering in the tens of thousands? And more importantly, what would the galaxy look like when this was over? The Confederacy had been one of the dominant powers in known space, but they had just activated a protocol that revealed an entirely separate civilization, one that apparently considered massive military fleets to be standard operating procedure. The Drevnathi had seemed unstoppable. Now, As Krell watched portal after portal open to disgorge fresh human warships, he wondered if the invaders had any idea what they were about to face. The galaxy was about to change. The humans were coming, and they were bringing firepower that existed only in theoretical discussions among Confederacy strategists. Whatever happened next, Krell knew that nothing would be the same. He just hoped that when the dust settled, the Confederacy and its member species would still exist to see the new order that emerged. The Drevnathi War Prime Kesserith stood aboard his flagship, the Consuming Darkness, and surveyed the holographic displays showing the conquered territories. 4 more worlds had fallen to his fleets in the past rotation. The defenders had put up their usual futile resistance, throwing outdated vessels against his war machines and achieving nothing except postponing the inevitable. The next target cluster contains 6 inhabited worlds, his tactical officer reported. 3 are heavily populated. Estimated total resistance capacity is minimal. Their defensive fleet was shattered at Rigel Station. Kesserith's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. This galaxy had proven disappointingly easy to consume. The locals called themselves the Vaxian Confederacy and claimed to represent 17 species, but their technology was primitive and their military tactics predictable. They fought with caution and restraint, always trying to minimize casualties, always holding back. It made them weak. The Drevnathi had no such limitations. Every ship was a weapon. Every soldier understood that death in service of the consumption was the highest honor. They didn't fight for territory or resources alone, but for the fundamental purpose of their species, to spread, to grow, to consume all before them. "How long until we reach their core worlds?" Kesserith demanded. "At current pace, 34 planetary rotations. The debris fields from destroyed defensive stations may slow our advance slightly, but nothing significant." Kesserith was about to issue orders for the next wave of attacks when his sensor officer made a harsh clicking sound that indicated alarm. "War Prime, we're detecting massive spatial distortions. Unknown origin. Coordinates placing them near the Confederacy core worlds." "Show me." The holographic display shifted, showing long-range sensor data. Kesserith's multiple eyes narrowed. The distortions were unlike anything in the Drevnathi database. Not wormholes, not standard jump portals, something else entirely. "Could be a new Confederacy weapon," suggested the tactical officer. "Some desperate attempt to turn the tide." "Monitor and analyze," Kesserith ordered. "If they've developed something new, we'll need to adapt our approach. But I doubt these prey species have suddenly developed the capacity to threaten us." He dismissed the readings and returned his attention to the immediate conquest. Whatever the Confederacy was attempting, it would fail, like everything else they'd tried. 3 hours later, his confidence began to waver. "War Prime, urgent report from our forward scouts," the communications officer announced, genuine concern in her voice. "Fleet Captain Dresch reports encountering unknown vessels near the 4th planet of the Helion system. He attempted to engage and was destroyed. All 16 ships in his group were eliminated in under 4 minutes. Kesserith's attention snapped fully to the tactical display. Losing a scout group wasn't unprecedented, but losing them that quickly was unusual. The Confederacy forces typically took hours to whittle down even small Drevnathi formations. "What kind of vessels?" "Unknown classification." The brief data transmission before Fleet Captain Dresch was destroyed showed ship designs not matching any Confederacy database. Estimated count was approximately 300 vessels, possibly more. 300 ships destroying 16 Drevnathi warships in 4 minutes. The mathematics of that exchange were concerning. Either these unknown vessels possessed significantly superior firepower, or they had tactical capabilities far beyond what the Confederacy had demonstrated. "Redirect surveillance assets to that region. I want full reconnaissance. These could be mercenaries the Confederacy hired, or perhaps a previously unknown faction entering the conflict." Over the next several hours, more reports flooded in. Another Drevnathi scouting group encountered the unknown fleet and was annihilated. This time, they managed to transmit more detailed sensor data before dying. Kessereth studied the information with growing unease. The unknown vessels used weapon systems that operated on principles his scientists couldn't immediately identify. Energy weapons, certainly, but with power outputs that seemed impossible for ships of their size. And their defensive shields were absorbing hits from Drevnathi plasma cannons without failing. War Prime, we've identified communication signals from these vessels. The language is unknown, but our systems are working on translation. Speed of the unknown fleet? They're moving toward our positions. Current estimates suggest they'll reach our forward elements within 3 hours. Kessereth made a decision. Pull back all scout groups. Form our advance fleet into defensive formation, 500 ships, position them at the Krell Nebula. We'll see what these newcomers do when faced with real Drevnathi military power. The Drevnathi advance fleet assembled as ordered, 500 warships, each one a masterpiece of destructive capability, arranged in a formation designed to maximize overlapping fire patterns. Kessereth watched the preparations through real-time feeds from the fleet commander. When the unknown vessels arrived, they didn't hesitate. They didn't attempt communication. They simply attacked. Kessereth watched in horror as the battle unfolded. The unknown fleet numbered approximately 2,000 ships, and they moved with a coordination that seemed almost organic. Smaller vessels darted through Drevnathi formations, their weapons tearing through armor that was supposed to be nearly impenetrable. Larger ships hung back, unleashing barrages that destroyed multiple Drevnathi vessels with each volley. The Drevnathi advance fleet fought back with characteristic ferocity. They scored hits, destroying dozens of the unknown ships. But for every enemy vessel destroyed, they lost 5 of their own. The exchange rate was catastrophic. Within 20 minutes, the Drevnathi advance fleet was gone. 500 warships reduced to debris and expanding plasma clouds. War Prime, his communications officer's voice shook with something Kessereth had never heard before: fear. We've completed partial translation of the unknown fleet's communications. They call themselves humans, Terran Federation, and War Prime, there's more. Long-range sensors have detected additional fleets arriving through those spatial distortions. Current estimates suggest somewhere between 20 and 30,000 vessels total. The command center fell silent. 30,000 ships. The entire Drevnathi invasion force numbered 4,000 vessels, and that represented the largest military deployment in their species' history. That's impossible, Kessereth said, but even as he spoke, he knew he was denying reality. Where did they come from? We surveyed this galaxy. There's no civilization with that kind of military capacity. The Confederacy must have sent a distress call beyond known space, the tactical officer suggested. These humans responded to it. We're detecting communication between Confederacy vessels and the human fleet. They're coordinating. Kessereth's mandibles ground together as he processed this new reality. The Drevnathi had encountered resistance before, but never anything like this. They had always relied on superior numbers and overwhelming force. Now they faced an enemy that outnumbered them significantly and appeared to possess technological advantages. Begin full retreat, he ordered. All fleets fall back to the staging area. We need time to analyze these humans and develop counter-strategies. But even as the orders went out, Kessereth knew retreat might not save them. The human fleet was already in motion, and early reports suggested they were moving faster than Drevnathi ships could manage. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Indomitable, reviewing tactical displays that showed the Drevnathi fleet beginning to withdraw. Around her, the command crew worked with calm efficiency, coordinating the movements of 15,000 warships spread across multiple star systems. The Drevnathi are retreating, her tactical officer reported. All enemy groups are falling back toward these coordinates. A point lit up on the star map, showing a region beyond the Confederacy's borders. "Pursuit course plotted?" Chen asked. "Yes, Admiral. Multiple strike groups are already in position to intercept retreating enemy forces. Should we engage?" Chen considered. The Drevnathi had invaded Confederacy space, destroyed civilian populations, and shown no indication of being interested in peace, but humanity had rules of engagement, even against aggressors. Transmit a message on all frequencies. Inform the Drevnathi that they are to cease all hostile actions immediately and withdraw from Confederacy space. If they comply, we'll allow their retreat. If they continue attacking civilian targets or refuse to withdraw, we'll consider them hostile and engage with full force. The message was sent. For several minutes, there was no response. Then Drevnathi ships that had been moving toward Confederacy colonies abruptly changed course, joining the general retreat. "They're withdrawing," the tactical officer confirmed. "All Drevnathi forces are leaving Confederacy territory. Maintain pursuit at a distance," Chen ordered. "I want surveillance assets tracking every Drevnathi ship. They don't get to regroup and try this again next month." As the immediate crisis passed, Chen opened a communication channel to Ambassador Krell, whose ship was maintaining position near the human fleet's command group. "Ambassador, the Drevnathi are retreating. Your core worlds are secure." On the view screen, Krell's three eyes all focused on her with an intensity that suggested he was still processing everything that had happened. "Admiral Chen, I don't have words adequate to express our gratitude. Your fleet arrived and achieved in hours what we couldn't accomplish in weeks. You've saved billions of lives." "That's what the protocol was designed for," Chen replied. "But we need to discuss what comes next. The Drevnathi are retreating, but they're not destroyed. They'll either regroup and try again, or they'll seek easier targets elsewhere. Neither option is acceptable." "What do you propose?" "A permanent solution. We track them to their staging area and eliminate their capacity to wage war. Not genocide," Chen added quickly, seeing Krell's reaction. "We'll offer terms of surrender. If they accept, we establish monitoring to ensure they demilitarize. If they refuse, we dismantle their war machine by force." Krell was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant military operation. The Drevnathi staging area must be heavily fortified." "Likely," Chen agreed. "But Ambassador, humanity didn't build fleets this size to fight small battles. We're prepared for large-scale operations. The question is whether the Confederacy wants this ended permanently, or if you'd prefer we simply chase them away and hope they don't come back." "I'll need to consult with the Council," Krell said. "But personally, I believe ending this threat permanently is worth any reasonable cost. We've seen what the Drevnathi do to conquered worlds. We can't allow them to simply move on and do it to someone else." "Agreed. Coordinate with your council. In the meantime, we're establishing security perimeter around Confederacy space. No hostile forces will enter while we're here." As the communication ended, Chen turned to her fleet coordinator. "Status of 2nd and 7th fleets?" "2nd Fleet will arrive within 8 hours. 7th Fleet is still assembling but expects to complete mobilization within 24 hours. Combined fleet strength at that point will be approximately 45,000 vessels." Chen nodded. 45,000 ships was overkill for dealing with 4,000 Drevnathi warships, even assuming the enemy was entrenched in fortified positions. But humanity had learned through centuries of warfare that overwhelming force prevented prolonged conflicts. Better to show up with 10 times the necessary firepower and end things quickly than to get drawn into a grinding war of attrition. "Maintain current alert status. The Drevnathi might attempt a surprise counterattack. They're running scared now, but cornered enemies can be dangerous." Throughout Confederacy space, billions of beings looked up at their skies and saw the signs of humanity's arrival. In orbit around every major world, human vessels maintained protective formations. Smaller ships patrolled trade routes and evacuation corridors. The sheer scale of the deployment was difficult to comprehend. On the Confederacy homeworld, emergency sessions of the Council continued around the clock as representatives struggled to understand what had happened. They had sent out a desperate call into the void and summoned something far beyond their expectations. "They're not asking for anything," Counselor Thena observed during one heated debate. "No payment, no territorial concessions, no trade agreements. They simply arrived, fought our enemy, and now offer to end the threat permanently. Which means they want something we haven't identified yet," Commander Zefix argued. "No one deploys 45,000 warships out of altruism. There's an agenda we're not seeing." Ambassador Krell, freshly returned from his meeting with Admiral Chen, addressed the Council. "I've spoken extensively with the human leadership. Their motivation appears genuine, if unusual by our standards. They placed these protocols millennia ago as a safeguard. When we activated it, their entire civilization was notified. They came because they believe in protecting younger species from extinction." "You actually believe that?" Zefix challenged. "That they're just noble protectors asking nothing in return?" "I believe," Krell said carefully, "that humanity has resources and territory we can't even properly imagine. The protocols suggest they control regions of space far from here. What would they gain from conquering the Confederacy? We have nothing they couldn't acquire more easily elsewhere." "Then what do they want?" Thena asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The truth, which Krell suspected but couldn't prove, was that humanity might genuinely want nothing except to see the Drevnathi threat eliminated. It seemed impossible, contradicting everything the Confederacy understood about species behavior. But the evidence was there in every interaction, every decision the human fleet made. They had come because someone called for help. They were staying to finish the job. And when it was done, they might simply leave, returning to whatever mysterious regions they called home. It was a level of altruism that made many council members deeply uncomfortable. Some things in the galaxy were constant. Species competed for resources. Military power was used to extract concessions. Nothing was truly free. Humanity's behavior violated those constants, which meant either the Council was missing something obvious, or they were dealing with a civilization that operated according to completely different principles. As debates raged, the human fleet continued its work. Defensive perimeters were established. Surveillance networks were deployed. Damaged Confederacy vessels were offered repair assistance. Refugee ships were escorted to safe ports. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, as if they'd done this dozens of times before. War Prime Kessereth received the human message while his remaining fleet retreated to the staging area. The terms were clear: cease all hostile actions, withdraw from Confederacy space, and prepare for negotiations regarding permanent demilitarization. Failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of Drevnathi military capability. He had ordered the retreat because there was no other rational choice. The humans possessed overwhelming advantages in numbers, technology, and tactical coordination. Fighting them would be suicide. But the idea of surrendering, of accepting demilitarization, violated everything the Drevnathi represented. "The Council demands your presence," his communications officer informed him. "They're meeting to determine our response to the human ultimatum." Kessereth made his way to the Council chamber, where the other war primes and the civilian leadership had assembled. Anger and fear mixed in the air, creating an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. "We should fight," War Prime Jaqen declared immediately. "Retreat is temporary, but surrender is permanent. We are Drevnathi. We do not submit." "We also don't commit suicide," Kessereth countered. "I've seen the tactical reports. The humans destroyed our advance fleet in 20 minutes. They have 45,000 warships against our 4,000, and their technology is superior in every category we've measured. Fighting them is pointless." "Then we've already lost," Jaqen snarled. "If we can't fight and won't retreat, what options remain?" The question had no good answer. The Drevnathi had built their entire civilization around military expansion. Accepting demilitarization meant accepting the end of their way of life, but fighting meant extinction. "Perhaps," said Council Head Moreth slowly, "we need to consider that our expansion has reached its natural limits. Other species adapted when they encountered superior forces. The question is whether we're capable of doing the same." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some demanded a final glorious battle. Others advocated for attempting to negotiate better terms. A few suggested scattering the fleet and attempting guerrilla warfare, though even they admitted it would likely fail. Kessereth listened to the debate and felt something he'd never experienced before: the weight of obsolescence. The Drevnathi had been apex predators in this region of space. Now they'd encountered something bigger, and all their ferocity and military power meant nothing. The humans were offering terms, not extermination. That alone suggested they could be reasoned with. Perhaps survival meant learning to exist in a galaxy where the Drevnathi were no longer the greatest threat. It was a bitter realization, but reality cared nothing for pride. The human diplomatic vessel approached the Drevnathi staging area under flag of truce. Admiral Chen had insisted on leading the negotiation mission personally, accompanied by a full diplomatic team and enough military escorts to ensure security without appearing overtly threatening. Behind them, positioned at carefully calculated distances, the combined human fleet waited in formations that demonstrated both readiness and restraint. Ambassador Krell had requested permission to accompany the human delegation, and Chen had agreed. Now the Vaxian diplomat found himself aboard a human ship, approaching the species that had nearly destroyed his entire civilization just weeks ago. "Nervous?" Chen asked, noticing Krell's appendages twitching. "Terrified," Krell admitted. "The last time Confederacy representatives approached the Drevnathi, they were killed before they could speak. The Drevnathi don't negotiate, they consume." "They'll negotiate today," Chen said with certainty, "because the alternative is unacceptable to them. We've made that very clear." The human ship docked with the Drevnathi station without incident. Armed security personnel accompanied Chen and Krell through corridors that bore signs of hasty preparation. The Drevnathi had clearly not expected to be hosting diplomatic talks in their military staging area. The negotiation chamber was austere and functional. War Prime Kessereth waited there with several other senior Drevnathi leaders. His multiple eyes tracked Chen and Krell as they entered, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise or hostility. "You are the humans," Kessereth stated. It wasn't a question. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation. This is Ambassador Krell of the Vaxian Confederacy. We're here to discuss terms." "Terms of our surrender," Kessereth said bitterly. "You could simply destroy us from orbit. Why this performance?" Chen took a seat at the conference table, gesturing for her team to do likewise. Krell noticed that the human security personnel remained standing, positioned with clear lines of sight to all potential threats. Professional and alert, but not aggressive. "Because humanity doesn't believe in unnecessary destruction," Chen replied. "You invaded Confederacy space and killed billions of sentient beings. Under our laws, that makes you war criminals. But exterminating your entire species in retaliation serves no purpose beyond revenge. We're here to offer an alternative." "Speak your terms, then," Kessereth demanded. "Let us hear what price you demand for our continued existence." Chen activated a holographic display that showed territorial boundaries and military restrictions. The terms are straightforward. First, all Drevnathi military vessels will be escorted to designated locations where they will be dismantled under Terran supervision. You may retain defensive vessels sufficient to maintain internal security and respond to natural disasters, but your capacity for offensive military operations will be eliminated. "You would leave us defenseless," War Prime Jaqen growled. "You would be defended," Chen corrected. By us. Any force that attacks Drevnathi territory will face Terran response. You're not being abandoned. You're being integrated into a wider security structure. And what's the price for this protection? Kessereth asked. What resources do you demand? What tribute? None, Chen said simply. Terran protection comes without financial cost to protected species. The Drevnathi leaders exchanged glances of obvious confusion. Krell understood their reaction perfectly, having experienced the same disbelief. You expect us to believe you'll defend our territory, maintain military forces at your own expense, and ask for nothing in return. Kessereth's tone carried deep skepticism. Chen leaned forward. Let me explain something about humanity, War Prime. We've fought wars that make your conflict with the Confederacy look like a minor border skirmish. We've faced extinction-level threats and survived through cooperation, sacrifice, and an unwillingness to abandon allies. We learned millennia ago that the best defense against galactic-scale threats is ensuring as many species as possible survive and prosper. Dead civilizations can't help defend against the next crisis. What threats? Yakin demanded. What exists in your region of space that requires 45,000 warships? Chen's expression darkened slightly. Things you should be grateful you've never encountered. The point is, humanity builds fleets this size because we've learned the hard way that being prepared prevents catastrophes. We place protocols like the one that summoned us because we believe the galaxy is better when diverse species survive. And we offer terms like these because reformed enemies are better than dead ones. Kessereth's mandibles worked silently as he processed this information. You're saying that if we accept demilitarization and Terran oversight, we continue existing as an independent species? We retain our government, our territory, our way of life? Your way of life will need to change, Chen said firmly. A civilization built entirely around military conquest isn't sustainable in a galaxy with oversight. But yes, you retain self-governance, territory, and independence. We're not here to conquer you, War Prime. We're here to stop you from conquering others. And if we refuse? Jaqen challenged. If we choose to fight, rather than accept these terms? Chen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes went cold. Then the Terran Federation will systematically dismantle every Drevnathi military asset in existence. We will hunt down every warship, destroy every weapons platform, and eliminate your capacity to threaten anyone ever again. We won't exterminate your species. We'll cripple it so thoroughly that you'll spend centuries recovering. And during those centuries, you'll have no protection. Any species you've harmed will be free to seek revenge. That's not a threat, War Prime. It's a statement of consequences. The chamber fell silent. Krell watched the Drevnathi leaders processing Chen's words. He could see the calculations behind their eyes, the weighing of options. Pride versus survival, honor versus extinction. Finally, Council Head Morith spoke. You mentioned integration into a security structure. Does this mean other species exist under similar arrangements? Several, Chen confirmed. Species that were once aggressive expansionists but chose reform over destruction. They're now productive members of a wider galactic community. They maintain their cultures, govern themselves, and contribute to collective security. Some have even developed technologies and cultural achievements that benefit everyone. Demilitarization doesn't mean stagnation, it means redirection of resources toward productive purposes. Morith turned to Kessereth. Your assessment, War Prime? You've fought these humans. Can we defeat them? Kessereth's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh or a groan. No, not even close. I've reviewed every tactical report. The humans are superior in every military category. Our only hope in combat would be inflicting enough casualties to make the war costly for them, but given their numbers and technological advantages, I estimate we could kill perhaps 5,000 of their ships before being completely destroyed. They would lose roughly 10% of their current fleet and still have overwhelming superiority. And that assumes they don't have additional fleets we haven't seen. We do, Chen said matter-of-factly. The forces currently deployed represent approximately 30% of the Terran Federation's total military capacity. If you forced us into a prolonged conflict, we could increase deployment to several 100,000 ships. Several 100,000. The number was so absurd that Krell briefly wondered if the translation was malfunctioning. But Chen's expression suggested she was completely serious. What could possibly require that much military power? Krell asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Existential threats, Chen replied. Threats that, if we discuss them now, would give you nightmares for years. The Drevnathi are regional aggressors, dangerous certainly, but limited in scope. Humanity prepares for threats that endanger entire galactic arms. We build these fleets because we've learned that being over-prepared is better than being extinct. Kessereth made a decision that contradicted every instinct his species had developed over millennia of conquest. We will accept your terms, Admiral Chen. The Drevnathi will demilitarize and submit to Terran oversight. War Prime, no! Jaqen protested. This is surrender. This is the end of everything we are. This is survival, Kessereth countered. And survival means we get to become something else. I've led fleets into battle for decades, Jaqen. I know when a battle can be won and when it can't. This is the latter. We either accept these terms or we die. I choose life. The debate among the Drevnathi leaders continued for several more hours, but the outcome was inevitable. Pride couldn't overcome mathematics, and the mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. Eventually, even the most aggressive war primes acknowledged reality. The treaty was signed aboard the Indomitable 3 days later. Representatives from the Terran Federation, the Vaxian Confederacy, and the Drevnathi affixed their marks to a document that fundamentally changed the power structure of the region. Under Terran supervision, the Drevnathi began the process of dismantling their war fleet. Thousands of vessels were escorted to designated facilities where they would be systematically broken down. The process would take months, possibly years, but it would be thorough. Meanwhile, human forces established permanent monitoring stations throughout both Confederacy and Drevnathi space. Not as occupiers, Chen was careful to emphasize, but as peacekeepers. The stations were staffed and supplied by Terran resources, costing the local species nothing. Ambassador Krell found himself working alongside human diplomatic personnel, helping to establish the framework for what was being called the Mutual Defense Compact. It was a security arrangement that guaranteed protection to member species while requiring them to maintain peaceful relations with each other. I still don't fully understand, Krell admitted to Chen during one of their frequent coordination meetings. Humanity has spent enormous resources on this intervention. You've deployed tens of thousands of ships, established monitoring networks, and offered defense guarantees that will require ongoing military presence, and you're asking for nothing in return. It contradicts everything we understand about civilizations. Chen smiled. Let me tell you a story, Ambassador. About 3,000 years ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself. Wars, environmental collapse, resource depletion. We came within decades of extinction. We survived because a few groups chose cooperation over competition, mutual aid over selfish advantage. Those groups built what eventually became the Terran Federation. She pulled up a display showing human history. Images of devastated worlds slowly transformed into images of thriving colonies. We learned that survival requires thinking beyond immediate advantage. The protocols we placed around the galaxy weren't altruism in the pure sense. They were investment in our collective future. Every species that survives is a potential ally, a source of knowledge, a contributor to galactic civilization. The Confederacy activated a protocol, and we responded. In doing so, we prevented the extinction of 17 species. Someday, one of those species might develop a technology that saves human lives, or create art that enriches human culture, or stand beside us against a threat we can't face alone. So it is transactional, Krell said, just on a much longer timeline than we're accustomed to. Perhaps, Chen acknowledged. Or perhaps humanity has simply learned to value cooperation for its own sake. Does the motivation really matter if the result is that multiple civilizations survive and prosper? Krell considered this. I suppose not, though it will take time for the Confederacy to fully adjust to this new reality. We've spent centuries as one of the dominant powers in this region. Now we're a protected species under a security umbrella provided by a civilization we didn't even know existed. Your partners, Chen corrected gently. Not subjects. The compact is built on mutual respect. We protect you, yes, but we also learn from you. Already our scientists are fascinated by Confederacy crystal matrix computing systems. Your engineers have approaches to starship design that could improve our own vessels. This is meant to be beneficial for everyone. Over the following months, the transformation continued. Drevnathi vessels were dismantled. Human monitoring stations became fixtures in the local political landscape. Trade routes reopened under Terran protection. Species that had been preparing for extinction began planning for the future again. On the Confederacy homeworld, Counselor Thena stood before the assembled government and presented her analysis of the situation. We face a fundamental choice, she said. We can view humanity's arrival as the end of Confederacy independence, or we can view it as an opportunity. The humans have technology and knowledge far beyond ours. They're willing to share it, to help us advance. They've offered protection that frees up resources we would have spent on military defense. We can use those resources for scientific research, cultural development, and improving the lives of our citizens. At what cost? Commander Zephyx asked, though his tone was less hostile than it had been months ago. The sight of 45,000 human warships had made an impression even on him. At the cost of accepting that we're not the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, Thena replied. That's not a new situation, Commander. We've never been the most powerful. We just didn't know who was. Now we do, and we have a choice about how to respond. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The Confederacy formally joined the Mutual Defense Compact, accepting Terran protection and committing to peaceful relations with neighboring species, including the Drevnathi. For the Drevnathi, the transition was more difficult. A species built around military conquest struggled to find new purpose. But slowly, with guidance from Terran advisors and support from Confederacy partners, they began to adapt. Drevnathi engineers turned their talents toward industrial development. Their tactical minds found application in logistics and resource management. It wasn't the glorious conquest they'd dreamed of, but it was survival and, gradually, something more. Admiral Chen prepared to depart with the majority of the fleet 6 months after the initial intervention. Enough ships would remain to maintain the security perimeter, but the massive armada that had appeared in response to the ancient protocol was no longer needed. Ambassador Krell attended the departure ceremony, watching as portal after portal opened to receive the human vessels returning to their mysterious home territories. Will we see you again? Krell asked Chen during their final meeting. Probably not personally, Chen admitted. I have other assignments waiting. But humanity will maintain presence here. The monitoring stations will remain staffed. If another crisis arises, the protocols will summon help again. You're not being abandoned, Ambassador. You're being welcomed into a larger community. A community with very powerful friends, Krell observed. Chen smiled. Friends who remember what it's like to face extinction. Friends who believe the galaxy is better when cooperation triumphs over conflict. Friends who will answer when you call, because that's what friends do. The last of the human fleet departed through glowing portals, leaving behind a galaxy fundamentally changed. The Confederacy and its member species faced an uncertain future, but it was a future that included hope. The Drevnathi began the long process of cultural transformation, guided by beings who had once been enemies but might someday be allies. And far away, in regions of space the Confederacy was only beginning to learn about, humanity continued its eternal vigil, building fleets, maintaining protocols, and preparing for threats that most species couldn't imagine. They had answered one call for help. They would answer others when they came, because that was what humanity did. They had survived their own near extinction by choosing cooperation over competition, mutual aid over selfish advantage. They had learned to think in terms of centuries and millennia, building systems that would protect younger species long after the builders were gone. The ancient protocols weren't just technology. They were a promise, encoded in subspace transmissions and automated systems. A promise that no species facing extinction would face it alone. A promise that somewhere in the darkness, help was waiting to be summoned. The Confederacy had activated that promise accidentally, desperately reaching out with no real expectation of response. And humanity had responded with an armada because that was the promise they had made, thousands of years ago, to civilizations they would never meet. It was a promise they intended to keep, no matter how far they had to travel or how many ships they had to deploy. Because in a galaxy full of threats and dangers, cooperation was the only reliable path to survival. And humanity had learned that lesson well. Krell stood at the observation port of the Confederacy diplomatic station, watching the last portal close. The human ships were gone, but their presence remained in the monitoring stations, the defense perimeter, and the knowledge that if danger returned, help was only a protocol activation away. "We summoned them accidentally," Counselor Thena said, joining Krell at the viewport. "We had no idea what we were calling." "We summoned friends," Krell replied. "We just didn't know it yet." "Friends with very big guns," Thena observed wryly. "The best kind to have," Krell agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, contemplating a future that looked nothing like what they had expected. The galaxy was bigger than they had imagined, full of civilizations and powers they had never known existed. But it was also safer, protected by beings who had chosen to stand between younger species and the darkness. Somewhere in the vast regions of space humanity called home, Admiral Chen filed her report on the Drevnathi incident. Another protocol activation, another species saved, another region stabilized. Routine work for the Terran Federation, though it had seemed miraculous to those who received the help. The report was marked complete and filed away. Already Chen was reviewing briefings on her next assignment, preparing for the next crisis that would require intervention. Because the galaxy was large and dangerous, and there was always another threat on the horizon. But for now, in this region of space, peace reigned. The Confederacy rebuilt, the Drevnathi adapted, and above them all, human monitoring stations kept watch, ready to summon help if needed. The protocol had worked exactly as designed. A desperate call had been answered with overwhelming force. And in the aftermath, a new order was born, one built on cooperation rather than conquest, protection rather than exploitation. It was the future humanity had envisioned when they first placed the protocols, thousands of years ago. A galaxy where species helped each other, where strength was used to protect rather than dominate, where calling for help in desperate times would always bring response. The Confederacy had summoned humanity accidentally. But perhaps, Krell reflected, some accidents were meant to happen. Some calls for help were meant to be answered, and some friendships were forged in crisis and tempered by the knowledge that when darkness came, someone would stand beside you against it. The galaxy had changed, and it had changed for the better.